Dear participants, Dr. Shobit Omar has done his BTech in ceramic engineering from IIT, BHU, and he has earned his MS and PhD degrees in material science engineering from the University of Florida, USA. Nice place to go, sir. As a postdoctoral researcher, he has spent a few years at the RISO National Laboratory in Denmark and NIMS, which should stand for National Institute of Material Science, in Tsukuba, Japan. In 2011, Dr. Omar joined as an assistant professor in the Department of Material Science Engineering, IIT Kanpur. He is currently an associate professor in the same department. He's also worked as a visiting faculty in Material Science Engineering Department at the University of Maryland, US, from 2015 to 16. Dr. Omar's research involves studying the electrically conductive properties of ceramic materials, defect chemistry in metal oxides, establishing structure property correlations, solid oxide fuel cells and batteries, etc. He has also authored several research articles in the international journals related to energy materials. Dr. Shobit Omar, we are really happy to have you. I mean, as a layman, I can think of one thing. People may make any number of materials, any number of gadgets. Probably the what do you call, just like a product is put into into a box, into a package. I think you are here to give a package to products, that is as in coatings and membranes. I can think of that. People can do anything, and you will have a final say when it comes to what packaging you give it by giving it proper coatings and membranes. So, sir, I hand over to you. Please go ahead, and the space is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kamarra, for your kind introduction. So I really want the introduction to be short, so I should start giving this lecture about coatings and membranes. Coatings and membranes are a very general topic, and there are a lot of coating techniques people use to make devices as well as to do a lot of other things. One good example I will start with is like a pizza, right? I guess everybody would like to eat it because it's very tasty, and in that pizza you have a crust, a thin or thick crust, and then you have a coating of this tomato ketchup, and then you have a coating of this cheese, which everybody like, and this is really a good example where coating is used, right? So another, I mean, this is very layman type thing, but then there are other application of coatings in like in semiconductor industry, where it is used for addition purposes, for processing, as well as for functionalization. So, so I will introduce you about different, what is the reason why we are using coatings, and then I will be talking about what are the different deposition and coating techniques that people use. Okay.
Sir, kindly, Dr. Omar, can you kindly make the PPT full screen? It will help people who are watching on the, on the mobile and other things.
Sure. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, so I will be discussing about various type of deposition and coating techniques that people use to make devices, as well as then once I introduce that, I will be talking about 3 case studies where where ceramic coating has been used to make devices, right? So let's start with the application of coatings. First and foremost, why coatings and membranes are important. I just like to say one more thing, that since this is a very long lecture for 2 hours, 1.1 and over 30 minutes, I would really appreciate if you interrupt me in between and ask question, and that will also give me some breathing space, right? So I can answer at that time only. Okay, so please do not hesitate to stop me anywhere if you like, and please clear your doubts at that time only. So what I was saying that why coatings are and membranes are important. These are very important questions. And I have just listed out a few of the reasons why coatings are used. Uh, Coatings are used in wide array of application, and they can control the surface properties of the component. To give you an example, you can see a thermal barrier coating where ceramic coating is used to protect the superalloy from high temperature. So this this ceramic coating is used as a protection of metal against corrosion, hot corrosion, because on the other side of where the ceramic is exposed, a lot of fuel gases are there, right? And that will give you high temperature. Now, superalloy normally melts at around 1300 degrees centigrade, and it cannot sustain such a high temperature. And the high temperature is very much required to improve the efficiency of the fuel. Okay, so in order to improve that, in order to take both things into consideration, TBCs are used to protect this superalloy from high temperature hot corrosion. These thermal barrier coatings have, of course, having a low thermal conductivity, and it can sustain high temperatures. So I will talk about this in one of the case study that I have in this presentation. Then coatings are also used to improve the wear resistance of the cutting tools, right? So again, you can see that here the functional property of the surface of the component is changed, right? So we can improve the wear resistance of the cutting tool by using coatings here. Coatings are widely used in semiconductor industries, and for example, people use it for depositing silicon as well as for depositing insulating material like silicon nitride. Okay, I guess everybody is aware that insulating material are as important as the electrically conducting material, because they form the barrier between the two electrically conducting materials, right? So silicon nitride coating are very important in these circuits. And of course, solar panels are made of coatings of amorphous silicons, or nowadays people use these perovskites, organic perovskites. So these type of solar panels are also made of coatings, right? Thin film coatings. So people use sophisticated techniques to make these solar panels. These coatings are also used to improve the hydrophobic nature, right? So if you see some coatings are done on the material so that the hydrophobicity increase, and sometimes you want to change you decrease the hydrophobicity. You want it to be hydrophilic. So in that case also the coatings are used. These anti-reflected coating are used on the glasses, right? And to make the vision more clear. And sometimes people use antibacterial coating to protect the surface. Okay, these coatings are very important nowadays with the COVID-19 type virus are there. So people try to coat the sample or component with antibacterial coating. And they are also used in other devices such as batteries, and I will talk about it. But you can see that the current collector here are coated by the electrodes, right? So electrode coatings are there, and there is a layer, interlayer, which separate these two electronically conducting electrodes, right? So the separator, which is an interlayer, which do not conduct any electrons, they try to separate both these electrodes. So coatings and membranes are very important in these two in this application as well. And more about this and when I'm going to talk about the case studies. So let us talk about what are the different deposition techniques people use to deposit the coatings. Now, before going into that, I want to say that there are a lot of things which are very important when you discuss about when you select what type of deposition technique that you have to use to coat the samples or coat the component. First and foremost is the cost. What is the cost? Uh, uh, what is the cost requirement, and what is the thickness that you want to make of that coating? And the other thing is like whether your material or the component material is can withstand the condition in which the coating has been made. What is the sample size, right? All these things are very important. So while selecting what type of techniques that you have to select for a particular application. So let us talk about the deposition techniques. And well, there are different type of deposition techniques people have used. And here I have listed a few of them. And the first one is if you deposit a vapor on a substrate, and those type of techniques are physical vapor deposition and chemical vapor deposition. I will talk about them later on. But here the vapor is getting deposited on the surface of the substrate. Then what you have is wafer, which is a substrate, which is placed inside the chamber, and the constituent of the film are delivered in the gas phase, right? As what I said, it's a vapor deposition, and they form a thin film on the substrate. Then you have liquid phase deposition techniques, which are where liquid is getting deposited on the substrate. And we have few of them, like spin coating, spray coating, blade coating, dip coating, and of course tape casting, which is kind of a blade coating. So we will talk about it, but more or less the principle is that you form a uniform slurry of slurry or solvent, and you coat it on the surface of the substrate to form a thick film. Normally, the vapor deposition techniques are used to make thin films, while the liquid phase deposition techniques are used to make a thick film. Okay. Of course, there are vapor deposition techniques where you can make thick film as well, but then you will have, I mean, the quality of the film as well as the how much time and money that is involved to make that film. That is also a part of consideration that you have to make while selecting the vapor deposition technique to make a thick film. So let us talk about the first vapor deposition techniques. Okay, so what are the requirements to make a thin film deposition? All right. Well, the composition of the film should be the same as what we have desired, right? Because this is a vapor deposition, right? So the composition of the film, thin film, should be very much what we have desired. It should not be different, okay? And there should be low contamination, right? I will talk about that. We normally use a target material to coat the substrate, but so the contamination may come from there. So we have to make sure that there should be low contamination coming from low contamination inside the thin film that is deposited on the substrate. For semiconductor industries, electrical properties are very much important. So if you are putting a dielectric material, then you should not have any electrical conductivity inside the thin film. And if you are putting electrically conducting material, then the electrical conductivity of the thin film should be preserved. So that's one of the important idea when aspect that you have to take care when you are depositing on selecting a certain type of vapor deposition technique, right? Now, another thing is that the coating that you form on the substrate, it should adhere very well with the substrate, okay? And it should be uniformly deposited. That means that the thickness should be same everywhere, and it should be, of course, economical. So these are the few requirements of deposition. And when you talk about the differences between chemical vapor deposition and physical vapor deposition, as I said, it is of two types. Vapor deposition is of two types, chemical vapor deposition and physical vapor deposition. You will see that in CVD, the film would occur at high temperature, leading to a formation of corrosive gaseous product, which has to be, which may leave impurities in the thin film that you are depositing, right? So you have to make sure that these products that are formed, they should pump out of the chamber efficiently. Otherwise, they will form contamination. In a physical vapor deposition, the film deposition takes place at relatively low temperature, uh, but there are some variant as well when you require high temperature. But normally, this type of technique occur at low temperature, and you do not form any type of corrosive products. Okay, so this is one of the advantage of PVD compared to chemical vapor deposition. In PVD, you do not form any type of products, and in CVD, you form gaseous products. You have to flush out from the chamber. Now, this is one of the advantage, but then one of the distinct feature of CVD is it it has some chemical reaction involved, right? And in PVD, there is no chemical reaction involved. So this is a difference between a CVD and PVD process. So let's talk about the PVD first, okay? Which is, of course, the PVD is acronym. It's acronym of physical vapor deposition. It's a vaporization coating technique that uses physical mean to transform the solid material to vapors, which will coat the substrate. So I just want to, correct here. It is not just a solid material. It can be a liquid as well. But important thing is that it is using a physical means to transform that solid or liquid material to vapors, and that vapors is going to get deposited on the substrate. So this is a case of, this is figure shows the sputtering PVD process. You can see that on the top you have a target, and the sputtering gas is fed into this chamber, which has a high vacuum, and this sputtering gas sputtered the target, and the atoms are ejected out from this target, and these atoms of in the gaseous form or vapor form, they get deposited on the substrate. Okay, so this is normally the principle of physical vapor deposition. So here I just shown you the sputtering PVD process, which I will discuss later on also. But important aspect of PVD is that you can use a solid or liquid source to create thin films, right? To create vapors. So this solid, here I have shown the solid phase, right? But you can also use liquid phase. Okay, that is also the physical vapor deposition. And it uses physical process such as high temperature, vacuum, or gaseous plasma to force the material to be deposited into vapor form. Okay, to force the material to be deposited into vapor. So it transforms the solid or liquid into vapors. So, okay, using a physical process. And that physical process can be high temperature, vacuum, or gaseous plasma. So atoms in the gaseous form travels from the source to the substrate under partial vacuum. The vapor undergoes condensation on the substrate to form a thin film, right? And you can see there is no chemical reaction is occurring in this process of physical vapor deposition. So if I summarize, I can say that the condensed phase, which is a solid and liquid, they first evaporated. First step is evaporation to the vapor phase, and then that vapor phase is transported from the target to the substrate, okay, and then it condenses to form a thin film solid phase, okay, on the substrate. Evaporation and sputtering are two commonly used methods for the PVD, in the PVD for depositing thin films, right? So I can classify physical vapor deposition into two ways. One is evaporation, the other one is sputtering. Okay. So let's talk about the evaporation. So these are the evaporation system requirement. So you require very high vacuum around 10⁻⁴ to 10⁻⁷ Pascal for better quality films. You require a heating system. Okay, heating system can be thermal heating can be there, or it can be heated by plasma. Right. You require a bell jar to keep the vacuum inside the chamber. You require a thickness monitoring system, as well a mechanical shutter system to control the evaporating flux reaching the substrate. Okay, so you have to control that evaporating flux that is coming from the target to the substrate. So you require a mechanical shutter system as well. So let's talk about thermal evaporation deposition technique. Okay, as I said that there are two type of PVD. One is the evaporation, then the other is sputtering. So here I am talking about the evaporation, and in evaporation you have a thermal evaporation deposition technique. Okay. Now here, as the name suggests, that thermal evaporation deposition use external heating to heat the target material, and that target material is converted into vapor phase, and that vapor is getting deposited on the substrate. So a resistive heating method is used, and as you can see in this schematic, the material to be deposited is placed on some type of boat crucible, right? And you do the external heating through resistive heating method. So deposition is normally performed at high temperature, like 1000 to 2000 degrees centigrade, and under high vacuum. The weight now I have said high vacuum. The important thing about these vacuum is that if you have high vacuum, then the atoms can go in the vapor phase form directly from the target material to the substrate without getting scattered in between. Okay, without getting scattered in between. Okay. Also, the important thing is that normally the distance between this target material and substrate is quite is far. Both of them are far away from each other compared to if you see the electron beam evaporation deposition technique or sputtering process. The reason is because you are heating the this target material, and you are basically melting it, so you do not want the substrate surface to get affected from that heat. Okay, so you want to keep the substrate far away from the target material, right? So you require high vacuum for that, so that these atoms should not get scattered from from the atoms present in the atmosphere. Okay, so that's a requirement. That's a main requirement which is there in the thermal PVD process. Also, the high vacuum reduces the content of contamination and prevent any scattering, right? This technique is especially applicable for material with low melting point. Okay, I also say that this technique may have some contamination because you are heating the crucible. Okay, and the crucible atom may also go and sit on the substrate. So that will contaminate the film deposit on the surface. So this thermal evaporation deposition technique is susceptible to a contamination. So normally we use low melting point material to deposit a film, because you do not want to go to very high temperature where crucible also start ejecting the atoms from it, and that will contaminate your thin film. right? Now look into the electron beam physical vapor deposition, which is different from the thermal vapor deposition technique. Here you are using an electron gun to locally heat the target. Okay, and of course it is placed inside the chamber where the vacuum is there, but vacuum is not as high as what you have in the thermal deposition techniques. Also, you can see that target material is kept at high positive potential, right, which accelerate the electrons towards the target, and these electron beam loses its energy, and this energy is absorbed by the target material, and then the temperature increases, and as a result of that, uh, uh, the heat produced the melt the target, and the atoms are released in the gaseous form to form a thin film on the substrate. Okay, so these gaseous atoms precipitate at the substrate surface into solid form. The deposition rate is around 0.1 to 100 micron per minute, and that is what we can obtain from this technique. Now, the important advantages of E-beam physical vapor deposition is that you can go to very high temperatures, so that because you are locally heating the your target material, so you can this technique can allow deposition of refractory metals such as tungsten, tantalum, right? So this is one of the main advantage of using electron beam physical vapor deposition. The other thing is that since you are locally heating the target, you can use different type of target inside the same vacuum chamber. Okay, so you do not basically break the vacuum, right? You don't have to break the vacuum to change the target every time, right? So you can make multi-layer structure in the same chamber. Okay, and of course the contamination is not much because you are not heating the crucible, you are heating just the material, and you are locally heating the material. So low degree of contamination from the crucible in the thin film that is deposited on the substrate. Okay, so these are the main advantages of using electron beam PVD technique. What is the disadvantage? Disadvantage is that you are consuming a lot of electrical energy to melt the surface of the target materials, right? And when the electron beam interact with the solid material, it can also produce X-rays. So X-rays are produced inside the chamber. So these are a few drawbacks of electron beam physical vapor deposition. Any questions till now? If you have any questions, please please ask me right now. Okay. So let's talk about the modeling of the evaporation vapor pressure, right? So first of all, I talk about this P star, which is the partial pressure of a gas in equilibrium with a condensed phase at a given temperature. Okay. So we know that for any type of material, we have a vapor pressure. And that vapor pressure is basically the pressure that is applied by the this vapor phase on the condensed phase of that material at equilibrium, right? So at that point, there is no transfer of material from the condensed phase to the vapor phase and vice versa, right? So that pressure is called the vapor pressure, which is given by P star. Okay. Now this P star, we say that more high the vapor pressure of the material is, then it is more volatile. Okay. More is the vapor pressure, more is this material is more has more tendency to get evaporated and to form the vapor phase, right? So now P star is only a function of temperature, and I will give you the relationship between P star and T. It is governed by the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship, and it is given by this. which can be given as Tp star by dt, which is the temperature, and delta H, which is the latent heat, right? Latent heat, and this is a temperature. Then you have volume of the condensed phase, which is vapor phase, then the volume of the condensed phase, and I have just put it liquid. Okay, so normally the volume of liquid phase is very small compared to volume of the vapor phase. So I can ignore that volume of the liquid phase in this relationship, and what you will get is dP star by dt equal to delta H by T. Okay. Now, if we assume that these vapors follow the ideal gas law, then volume of the vapor is phase is given by RT by P star. Okay. Now, if you can input this here, what you will get is dP star by dt equal to delta H T by T, when you have RT square and of course P star. Okay. Now you can integrate this here. What you will get is log P star equal to minus delta H by RT plus a constant C1. Now assume that C1 is a constant which is given by LLC, where C is also a constant. So what relationship that you will get is P star is equal to C exponential minus delta H by R. So this is how the P star, which is a vapor pressure, is dependent on temperature. Okay. So again, I repeat here that higher is the vapor pressure, more volatile is the material. So the evaporation is more when you have higher vapor pressure.
So delta H is constant in this equation.
Yes, it's a latent heat.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so what I have shown you here in the previous slide is a P star. And let's say there is a pressure by the hydrostatic pressure which is applied on the condensed phase, right? On the condensed phase from the evaporates. So, and that pressure is given by P. Okay. So, Henrik Hertz, what he found experimentally, that the evaporation rate is proportional to P star minus P. Okay, so if you have a solid material and the evaporation is occurring, and that the evaporation rate is proportional to this P star minus P, and that is also consistent with the kinetic theory, in which the impingement rate are proportional to pressure. Right? Impingement is the how much collision is occurring on the surface. Right? So that flux is proportional to the pressure. And important thing is that Hertz also found that evaporation rate could not be increased by supplying more heat. It cannot be increased unless you are changing the temperature and you are changing the P star value. Okay, P star. As I said, from the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship, P star is only dependent on temperature. Even if you are giving high amount of heat and it's not changing the temperature, then evaporation will not change. Okay. Thus, there is a maximum evaporation rate set by P star, and this is only achieved in a vacuum. So P star minus P, so is very important term. So evaporation flux is dependent on P star minus P. Okay, so if you have vacuum, then this P, that hydrostatic pressure, is going to be zero. Then you will have a maximum amount of evaporating flux. Okay, so that is the idea to create. A vacuum inside the chamber to enhance the evaporation flux from the material, so that the condensed phase get evaporated in the vapor phase, and then that can be easily deposited on the substrate.
like last second.
Okay, so so this is what I was
अभी
talking
हो
about.
सकता है नहीं आ पा रहा
This is what, please mute yourself. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. So you can see that this is the condensed phase and this is your vapor phase, and that two type of fluxes coming. One flux is coming from the condensed phase, the other one is coming from the vapor phase on the condensed phase. So as I was saying, that the evaporation flux is basically the function of P star minus P, and this is the constant which depend upon the temperature. Okay, so flux, as you see, is the number of atoms that are coming per unit area, per unit time, right? Right? So this is how you define the flux. So this Ne is the number of atoms which are evaporating from the condensed phase to the vapor phase. Okay? Now, Hertz measured the evaporation rate, and he found that in the mercury vapors, the value that he's getting from the evaporation is basically 1/10 of what you have obtained from this relationship. Okay, so something is amiss. Something is there which is he is not considering, right? So Knudsen postulated that the evaporation vapor molecule are impinging on the condensed phase surface, may be getting reflected back. Okay, so whatever the atoms which are going from the condensed phase to the vapor phase, they are maybe getting reflected back to the vapor phase, and maybe we are trying to overestimate the evaporation rate from this expression, right? So what he came up with is this relationship, which is basically called Hertz-Knudsen relationship, and he has used one constant coefficient which is called the sticking coefficient, which take care of this return flux, which is getting reflected from the condensed phase surface. Now, he also, Knudsen also came up with some type of geometry of the chamber where the sticking coefficient is almost equal to 1. That means there is no return flux coming out. Okay, so we will talk about it here. And I just want to just write the dNE, the evaporation flux here, and it is given by dt equal to 2 pi m kBt. Kb is a Boltzmann constant, T is the temperature, m is the molecular weight, atomic weight, you can say, minus half. Then you have P star, because P is going to be 0 in when you have a vacuum. Okay, and in Knudsen's cell, that is what I was saying, that Knudsen had designed a cell where the sticking coefficient is almost equal to 1. So in that particular case, the sticking coefficient which is there is going to be equal to 1. So what you have is dNE AE dt equal to 2 pi m kb t minus half P star. Okay, so this is what you will have. Now, I can calculate the film growth rate from this evaporation flux, right? So film growth rate can be given as dNE by AE into dt divided by dt into atomic weight of the atom divided by density of the atom. Okay, and this will give me the basically the film growth rate. You know, this is the number into atomic weight, which will give you the weight, right? And then you have this density, and of course this is your time, right? dNE by dt. This is your time. So what you will have is square root of m 2 by kBt P star by rho. So this is the film growth rate that you can obtain from the analysis that we have done, and this is basically coming from the Hertz-Knudsen relationship. Okay. So let's talk about the sputtering deposition technique, which is another type of technique which people use, and it's very common in when you are using when you are depositing a noble metal, right? And in this sputtering technique, you use plasma, highly energetic particles, right, to sputter this this target surface, and this atom in the gaseous form, they start getting deposited as a thin film on the substrate. So what you do is basically ions are generated due to the large potential differences and are directed at the surface of the target. So you have a sputtering gas that is coming out, and because of the high electric field present, this sputtering gas, which is of a higher atomic weight atom, and normally we use argon, and these argon get particles or atoms, they get ionized because of this high electric field, and to form a plasma. This highly energetic plasma, they sputter the surface of the target and eject out the atoms of this target material, and in the form of vapors, and that vapors get deposited on the film, and it occurs under high vacuum. So sputtering atom condense on the wafer and form a thin film. Normally, as in the case in the electron beam PVD process, you can sputter high melting point materials, and you can make a good addition with the substrate. Okay. Well, the deposition rate depends on the mass, energy, and the direction of the bombarding ions. So this mass is very important. Atomic mass of the sputtering gas is very important. What is the energy that will form, and that depend upon the electric field that you will apply here, and of course what is the direction of the bombarding ions on the target surface. That will basically decide what is the deposition rate of the thin film on the substrate. Now, there are different types of sputtering deposition techniques, and so I just listed a few of them, but you will appreciate that there may be a different variant of sputtering deposition techniques people have used. First one is a magnetron sputtering, and you can see that target is here, right? This is a target and this is a substrate. And you have below this target, you have a magnets present, which is basically called magnetron. What they do is that the electron which is present in the sputtering gas or plasma, they try to attract this electron, and they try to move this electron in a cylindrical path. Okay? Now, once the electrons are in the cylindrical part, they strike more, they collide more with the argon atoms, and this result in the more ionization of the argon atom to form these highly energetic argon ions, right? These highly energetic argon ions. These argon ions are positive in nature. They will try to strike the target material which is negative, okay, which is basically cathodic, right? So these argon ions will try to strike the cathodic material, and the atom will then get ejected out, and then it reaches the substrate. Now, in this case, the distance between the substrate and target is small, right? Okay, so compared to what you have in the thermal vapor deposition, right? So we do not. So the chamber is also very small in the case of magnetron sputtering or any type of sputtering technique. Then we have a direct current sputtering technique. Okay. Now, suppose what happened in this is basically you apply the electric field, and the plasma that is formed, this argon ion again strike the surface, and the atoms are ejected in the vapor form, right? However, if this target material is insulating in nature, this iron get precipitated on the surface of the target material. Okay, because now this target material is not conducting any electrons. Okay, is an insulating dielectric material, and because of the polarization, these argon ion start accumulating on the surface of the target. Okay, so that's one of the drawback of using DC sputtering technique, because you cannot make a thin film of an insulating dielectric material from DC sputtering technique. So what is the solution for that? The solution is to use a radio frequency sputtering technique, which basically change the electric field at a frequency of 13.5 megahertz. Okay. Now, why we use this frequency? Because at this frequency, the impedance of most of the material become very low, right? Become very low. So we basically make this material conducting at this frequency by applying this frequency. Also, the use of AC power charge in the direction of electric field, and this will prevent the issue of accumulation of iron on the cathode material, because when we change the direction of electric field, these iron ions can be easily removed from the surface of the target material. Okay, so that's why we use radio frequency sputtering technique. Now, we also use ion beam sputtering technique. So in the previous case, we have used the plasma, right? So this sputtering techniques use ion beam. Okay, so collimated ion beams are directed to the target surface at a particular angle, and then you have a substrate which is rotating, and this the sputtered atoms in the vapor form, they get deposited on the substrate. So this is how the deposition occurs. So you can see that right here in this particular case, we are using ion beam as a physical process, right? Okay, to deposit a thin film on the substrate. Then there is also another variant which is quite extensively used to make a thin film of a dielectric material, is a PLD technique, where you ablate the target material with a highly energetic photons, right? You can see that they can have a high energy of 10 to the power of 8 watt per centimeter square. Once this laser beam strikes the surface of the target, a plume of plasma is formed, and this material absorbs the energy, and the plume of plasma get formed, and this plume get condensed on the substrate, which is present at certain angle, and also this substrate is heated, and that will control the nucleation rate of the thin film that is deposited on the substrate. Okay, we also use sometimes oxygen and nitrogen, because when you use such a high temperature, right? So oxide may lose some oxygen, and that may create some defects inside the material. And in order to keep the stoichiometry same, we use the oxygen as a background gas, and sometimes we also use nitrogen as well. Okay, but in all these techniques, one thing is that there is no chemical reaction involved. Okay, only the physical means are used to sputter the target to in the vapor phase, and that vapor phase is getting deposited on the substrate to form a thin film. Okay. Now let's talk about the chemical vapor deposition, which is also a very important technique, quite extensively used especially in a semiconductor industries, right? As I said, it is used to deposit silicon, it is used for deposit silicon nitride, it is used for addition purposes, it is also used for functionalization of the surface of the component. Okay, now let me describe it here. What is basically your CVD process? So you can see, just like what you have in the PVD, you have a chamber here, right? we have a chamber here, right? But we do not have any type of target material here, right? We do not have any target, but we, of course, we have a substrate, right, which is here. Now, substrate can be heated, right? Can be heated, thermally heated, or there are other variants as well. But let me just talk about describing the CVD process. So what happened is that you have a gas precursors that are coming, and they get absorbed on the surface of the substrate, and they react with each other. The chemical reaction is happening, and they form a thin film. Of course, if you have a chemical reaction, let's say you have a gaseous phase of A and B is coming, they react to form C and D, right? So C form a thin film, and you also have D, this is another gaseous product which has to go out from this chamber. So we have to pump this D phase out of this whole chamber. So this is the chemical vapor deposition technique, right? You require heat for it, okay? You require heat for it, and that heat can be supplied either just externally through electrical heating, or you use plasma to heat the whole chamber. Now the question may arise that why do we require heat, right? Why do we require heat? So for any type of chemical reaction, we know this, that if you plot the Gibbs free energy uh, 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 as a function of coordinate, you see that for the reaction to occur, it has to cross some activation barrier, right? Activation barrier. So for this chemical reaction as well, if this chemical reaction has to occur on the substrate, then the substrate should have some thermal energy that can be given for this reaction to occur. So that's the reason that we have a substrate at high temperature. Okay, so the external stimuli that I was talking about is either as a heat or plasma that can be used to initiate or propagate that can be used to initiate or propagate the reaction. Okay, so this is activating basically your chemical reaction. It is a multidirectional deposition. So PVD normally occur is a unidirectional, highly directional process where vapor is going from substrate to the target, right? Only in one direction. Okay, but PVD is a multi-directional deposition, and even if you have a curved surface of a substrate, then the deposition is occurring uniformly with the same thickness. Okay, so this is one of the advantage of chemical vapor deposition technique, that you can coat any type of surface, okay, and you will get a uniform layer. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. Even if you have some type of grooves here, then even after having that, you will have a uniform covering of the coating that you will have using the CVD process. Okay. Of course, the gaseous product that are formed in this chamber, they have to be pumped out. Otherwise, that will lead to deposition, and that will contaminate the thin film that is formed on the substrate. So you have to have some means to take out this gaseous product from the chamber. What are the different types of CVD process which are existing? There are many, but they share the same principle that I have discussed in the previous slide, and I just like to state few of them. One of the classification of CVD process is based on the pressure inside the chamber. Some reaction occur at atmospheric pressure. So atmospheric pressure chemical vapor deposition is that. Some require low pressure, then you have a low pressure chemical vapor deposition, and some require ultra high vacuum chemical vapor deposition. Then you have a ultra high vacuum CVD. Okay, and we also characterize CVD process based on the stimuli that you apply. For example, here we use plasma enhanced chemical vapor deposition. Okay, so instead of using the thermal heat, right, we use plasma to heat the to make the reaction occur. Okay, now when you use plasma to make the reaction to occur, then you have to have some source of plasma inside the chamber. So that is what we have is plasma enhanced CVD. We have a source of plasma, and this substrate is there, and where the reaction occurs, and because of the heat provided by this plasma. Now, compared to the thermal CVD, which is non-plasma CVD, this CVD process occur around 250 to 300 degrees centigrade. So this is the advantage of PECVD. Other non-plasma CVD techniques will take will require temperature of 600 to 1300 degrees centigrade. Okay, those are high temperature CVD, but plasma enhanced CVD do not require such a high temperature. Some of the CVD may be process is have a stimuli of photons, right? So the photons can initiate the process, and those type of CVD are called photo-initiated CVD. Sorry, there is a typo here. It's a photo-initiated CVD process. Okay. Then we also have atomic layer deposition technique, which is a type of CVD process in which gaseous vapor is introduced one at a time in sequence. Okay, so you will get one layer of one phase, then you have another layer of another phase. So you can make a multi-layer structure using atomic layer deposition. Okay, so these are the two important processes which I have talked about, which are based on the vacuum technology for the deposition of thick to thin film, and normally these processes are used to make a thin film, and thin film are basically the nanometer range. If you have any question till now, you can ask me right now. Shall I proceed? If you have any question, you can ask me. Okay, so I will proceed.
So, Mr. Omar, if you want a small break for a tea or something like that, please take it. It's not our idea to make you
No, that's
talk.
fine. I will continue. Okay, so another type of technique which is very important is thermal spraying technique. This technique is not a vapor deposition technique. It is in this technique you basically melt the powder that you have, and that melting will be done either through plasma, or you can do it from by supplying thermal heat, and that is through combustion flame. Okay, and that this liquid powder or melt is then deposited on the substrate, right? And you will have a uniform microstructure. And I will talk about this plasma spraying when we talk about the thermal barrier coatings, right? So there are various variants of thermal spraying coating, and one of them is electric discharge spraying, and the other is oxy-fuel coating spraying. You cannot make very thin coatings using thermal spraying technique. You can go from 20 micron to several millimeter. Okay, and the melt that is deposited on this substrate is basically the splat. It's basically called splat, and they have a certain microstructure, which I will talk about it later on. Now let us talk about liquid phase deposition, which is also very important when we try to coat ceramic or any type of polymer, right? And this type of technique is also extensively used in semiconductor industries. It is also used in different type of in consumer electronic markets, where you have like cell phones which are made, and you want to have a polymer deposition, so on a metal, substrate, then you use these type of coatings where the liquid phase is deposited on the hard ceramic substrate or a metal substrate. So what basically is there in this is that material is deposited in the liquid form. Okay, so highly molecular weight polymer is dissolved in organic solvent, and you will get a uniform adherent defect-free polymeric film using these techniques. And solvent evaporates, so you will evaporate the solvent, and the solid film that will remain, it will form a uniform coating on the substrate. So there are various type of techniques present, and a few of them are listed here. One is spin coating, spray coating, blade coating, tape casting, and dip coating techniques. Okay, so let's just talk about the spin coating technique, and you can see that you require a vacuum chuck which can hold your substrate here, and you first clean the substrate, okay, so that there should not be any contaminant. You remove all the particles from the surface of the substrate, and then you drop uh, the liquid phase on the surface of the substrate, and then you spin this vacuum chuck. Okay, because of the centrifugal force, this liquid will get deposited uniformly on the surface of the substrate. Okay, and the thinning of liquid film will occur. Okay, once it is done, then you will see that if you dry it, the solidification will occur from the center, and then it slowly move in a radial direction, and then finally you will get a solid film once you dry it. Okay, so this is how this process occurs, and the major issue with this is that you can only do this with in the flat surface. You can only do it on the flat surface, and the maximum thickness that you will get is around 200 microns. Okay, so if you have such type of surfaces, like where you have some type of side walls, you cannot use this technique. Okay, you cannot use it. That's a drawback of spin coating techniques. So coating cannot be done on a very large substrate, because then you will require a large vacuum chuck to spin the substrate, and you cannot create film on the curved surface. And then of course there will be a lot of solution wastage, because this liquid will come out from the substrate, right? And of course you cannot create gradient in thickness. Okay, that gradient cannot be made in the film thickness. So film thickness depend upon the rotational velocity, because rotational velocity will dictate what is the centrifugal force that you will apply. So higher is the velocity, smaller is the thickness, right? So this is the relationship that we have, that K and alpha are the two constants, right? And then thickness also depend upon the concentration, polymer concentration. If you have a higher concentration, then you will see that polymer is more viscous. Then the thickness is basically dependent directly on the polymer concentration. Also, thickness will depend upon the viscosity, and you can see eta is a dynamic viscosity here, and there are few constants. So if you sum these three relationships, then you will get expression for the thickness of the coating. Like here, K, beta, gamma, and alpha are 4 constants. Now here in this slide I talk about the spray coating, which is not dependent on the centrifugal force that is applied on the liquid film, but it depends upon the aerosol which is sprayed on the substrate and that stick to the slow moving substrate. So you see there is a nozzle here, right? There is a
Yes, I know. Dear participants, I think we have lost the speaker. Is there still? Shobit Kumar. Dr.
Yeah.
Shobit, oh, yes, yes, please. Yes,
Yeah.
we have you back now. We lost you about maybe a minute ago.
Okay. Okay.
Your screen is not there.
My screen is not there. Okay. Let me share this again. Is it there now?
Yes,
Can you
very
see
much.
that?
The same slide you're talking.
Okay. Okay. So this spray coating technique is not using the centrifugal force, but it depends upon the aerosol quality which is formed and that is sprayed on the substrate. Now, in this particular case, you can see nozzles are there, right? So, nozzle is there, and through which the liquid is flowed, and the aerosols are formed. These droplets are getting deposited on the slow-moving substrate. In certain type of variant, these nozzles are rotating, while in other variant, substrate moves. Okay, but this technique is good for side wall coverage. It is not only used for depositing film on the flat surfaces, but it is also used for when you have a complex shape structure, right? Component. Okay, so this technique is used for making transparent.
So no lunch break. We'll immediately after this we'll sit down.
Conductive film for touch panel, solar cell component, and semiconductor photoresist. Then this technique, I guess everybody is aware of. It's basically a very simple technique. It's called dip coating, where you take the component and you dip it inside the liquid and you put it for a certain period of time to allow a sufficient interaction between the substrate and the coating solution. And this, and then you take it out, withdraw it at a particular speed, and then you will form a thin film over the substrate. So this technique is very widely used in making porous ceramic membranes. Okay, and of course you have to dry the coatings that will form, and that can be done through thermal heating or using ultraviolet and infrared technique, infrared rays technique. Yeah, hello.
TKV. At 2 o'clock,
Okay.
what we'll do is.
Okay, so you also have. Here only. You cannot create film on curved surface. Okay.
We will get the output speaker from the laptop.
You cannot create films on curved surface. And while drying the film, there may be some cracking.
No, then what?
So that's one of the disadvantages. Also, you will require a large amount of solution.
To listen to the feedback.
You require a large amount of solution.
And if there are any questions to be asked to any one of us,
I request you to kindly please mute
yourself. Is it possible for all of us to answer to the same?
I request you please mute
One
yourself.
thing is, sir, you can speak. You can speak directly. It has its own mic.
Okay. So let's go to another. So this is another type of liquid phase coating technique. It's a blade coating, and in this technique you have a liquid phase and you apply, you run the blade over the substrate, and you see there is a gap between the blade and this substrate, and this is your substrate, right? This is your substrate, and there is a gap between the blade and the substrate, and through this gap, the thickness of this liquid coating is decided. Okay, if you want to have more thicker coating, then you keep this gap higher. Okay, so the small gap between the blade and substrate determine how much solution can get through. Okay, so this blade is run through the substrate, and the final thickness is basically the fraction of the gap between the blade and substrate. And the final thickness also depends on the viscoelastic property of the solution and what is the speed of the blade while it is running over the substrate. Okay, This process is scalable, but this cannot be used for a curved surface, and this is an inexpensive process. You can set it in your laboratory, and you can make a uniform thin film on the substrate. Okay, but you cannot make it in a complex component with a complex structure. Also, you cannot make thin film from this process. You cannot make film with a thickness of less than 10 micron, right? Using this process. Now we have electrochemical deposition technique, which is also used, and here I have shown you certain silver coated coating on T plots, right, which are placed on the inside this liquid electrolyte. Okay, and the deposition occurs through electrochemical means, and that process is basically called the electrolysis, right? And according to Faraday's, who has given Faraday law in 1833, the amount of chemical change produced by an electric current is basically dependent on the quantity of the electricity that is passed. So what happened is you have electrochemical cell where you have a cathode and you have an anode. Okay, the deposition normally occurs at the cathode side where this ions from the anode, okay, passes through the electrolyte and they get deposited on the cathode. Okay, and they get reduced and they get deposited on the cathode to form a thin film. So this is what is happening, and the amount of energy that you give is dictating the amount of reaction that will occur, amount of this electrochemical reaction that will occur. Okay, so amount of different substance that is liberated by a given quantity of electricity are proportional to the chemical equivalent weights. Okay, so amount the weight of the material deposited is dependent on the chemical equivalent weight, and this is given by this relationship. This is the mass of the material that is deposited on this substrate, and that depend upon the equivalent weight, chemical equivalent weight of this material. Okay, so this is the basics of electrochemical deposition, and I just have stated a few more slides dependent on the electrochemical, talking about the electrochemical potential as well as the delta G. So you see there is an electrochemical reaction or reduction that is occurring at the cathode side and is given by this reaction, right? And if suppose this delta G is the Gibbs energy change of this particular electrochemical reaction, then this will be related to the electrode potential, which is given by minus NFE, right? This delta G is given by minus NFE. Now this E is basically dependent on the activity of A and activity of these ions, right? So the concentration, temperature will dictate what is the electrode potential. What is the electrode potential? Now, when we do the electrolysis, then this much amount of potential you have to give for the reaction to occur, for this reaction to occur. Okay, so that is what the electrolysis process is, right? When you give some electrical energy and to transfer this electrical energy, change this electrical energy into the chemical energy, right? For this reaction to occur, you have to give some electrical energy, and that electrical energy is dictated by this Nernst reaction, okay, the Nernst equation, which will give you what is the potential is there on the cathode side. And if you look over the standard reduction potential series, there are a lot of elements there, right? So and also there is standard values with respect to SHE, and if you see that gold has higher potential, right? Gold iron, when they get reduced to gold, they have higher potential compared to something like the copper iron, which get reduced to copper. Okay, so higher is this value, higher is the tendency of this ion to get reduced. Okay, higher is the tendency to get this ion to reduce. So if suppose you have gold ion as well as lead ion present in the electrolyte, then of course these gold ion are going to get reduced on the cathode side and not the lead ion, because they have more tendency to get reduced. Okay, because they have higher potential, electrode potential. So if you are depositing, electrochemically depositing alloy, you have to satisfy two conditions. So one of the metal should be get deposited on the substrate. That is the main requirement of for the alloy. Okay, one of the metal should get electrochemically deposited on the cathode side. The other thing is that uh, the other potential, uh, uh, the potential of the other element of the alloy should be very close to that of the other remaining metal ion. So both the metal ions should have a very close deposition potential. That is the two condition which is there. And if there is a difference between the potential, we normally use a complexing agent to lower the potential of the one of the element which is having a higher potential. So complexing agent is normally used to convert the simple ions of the normal metal into the complex ion with lower potential, so that the potential of both the ions are very close to each other, and then they can deposit it at the same potential. Remember, electrode will have only one potential, and you have to deposit two ions which are having different potential, right? So of course, the ion which having a higher potential will deposit, but then you can reduce that potential using the complexing agent. So this is the idea that normally people use to electrochemically deposit alloys. Then there is a process called electrophoretic deposition, and this is very similar to electrochemical deposition. Here also you have ions which are here you have also the charge which are moving toward the cathode side, and they are getting deposited on the cathode. But there is a difference. The electrolyte that you have here is not the ion conducting. It is not ion conducting. Okay. What you have is basically the dielectric solution which is dielectric in nature, and you have a colloid particles, charged colloidal particles instead of ions present inside this solution. Now colloid is a spherical suspension of particles in liquid, right? And these charged particles they migrate because of this polarization field which is present in this fluid, and then it get deposited on this substrate, okay, because of this electric field, right? And so the liquid in which the charged particle migrate must be dielectric. They should not be conducting. Okay, so this is the difference between the electrochemical and electrophoretic deposition. Okay, it can form a nanometer thin film to 1 millimeter thick film, right? So you can get a uniform and even film form over whole part surface. Even if you have some type of complex surface, you can deposit a uniform film, and that film can cover the cavities, edges, and corners, right? This is not possible in electrochemical deposition, because that electrochemical deposition depends upon the current density which is there. And normally on the flat surface you have high current density, and on the edges you have a low current density. So normally you feel that the edges, the thickness of the film in electrochemical deposition is thin, while on the flat surface it is thick. So this is not possible in electrochemical deposition. So here are some of the differences between the electrochemical and electrophoretic deposition. You can see the moving species in electrochemical depositions are iron, while in electrophoretic it is solid particle, and the charge transfer is occurring by ion reduction. But here no such charge transfer is occurring. Okay, please remember that here the charge particles are moving. Okay, so no charge transfer on deposition is occurring. The conductivity of the electrolyte of the electrochemical deposition should be very high, but here it should be low. You require a dielectric liquid, and normally in the electrochemical deposition we use water, right, which has some which has some salts inside. But in the electrophoretic we do not want any type of water. Okay, that fluid should be not having any water. And the reason for that is that if you have some water, then some hydrogen and oxygen gas will evolve on the cathode and anode side, and that will create some porosity in the film. Okay, so we do not want any type of water present in the liquid medium. Also, if the water is present, then you will see that in the cathode side you have more OH negative ion, while on the anode side you have a acidic region, and that will change the pH of the solution, and that will destabilize the colloid which is present inside the fluid. So you do not want the water present in the liquid medium. So last, I talk about the tape casting technique, which is based on the blade coating, and you can see here that there's a tape here, right, and tape here which is formed, and this is the blade which we call a doctor blade, right, and you pour your slurry here, and this this substrate what you have is a mylar. Okay, so in the tape casting you can make stands alone, membranes, and also you can make a coatings on a particular substrate, right? So both are possible using the tape casting technique. So what happened is that this mylar rotate, right? It rotates, okay, and it normally is a plastic material, and the coating is done on the mylar, okay, and so you deposit your, pour your liquid on this, and this liquid passes through this gap between the doctor blade and the mylar, and you will have a uniform coating on top of the mylar. Okay, and this is the dryer which is present to dry the coating. So you can get a flexible ceramic tape out of the tape casting technique, right? So you see how flexible these ceramic tapes are, and this flexibility you get from adding the plasticizer inside the slurry. Okay, we normally know that how ceramics are brittle in nature, right? They are very brittle, but you can provide the flexibility by adding a plasticizer and other additives. So this is the tape casting unit, and you can see this is the doctor blade, and there are screw gauge to present, which are control the thickness between the mylar as well as the doctor blade. So these are the screw gauges which are present, and of course this is a dryer which is also there. In some cases, instead of mylar, your doctor blade is also moving, right? In some cases, doctor blade moves, right? This is a doctor blade which moves instead of the mylar. So you can get the coating on the substrate, right? So this is another variant which is a laboratory tape casting. So this is the one of the recipe of a ceramic slurry that I have stated. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to make a tape of a composite material which is based on nickel oxide and GDC, and you can see that if you have to do such type of coating, if you have to make such type of tape, you require a large batch of material. Normally we use 150 gram of batch, right? And then you add some solvents which are volatile in nature. Toluene and ethanol we normally prefer, and then we also add some dispersant so that these particles are well dispersed inside the solvent. We add plasticizer, which is made of DBP and PEG. Okay, that plasticizer gives you the plasticity inside the material, inside the tape, and PVA PVV, which is called the polyvinyl butyrate, which is the binder, so that will keep the tape intact, right? This will keep the tape intact. All these are polymer, right? All these are polymer, and these are very important to make your tape to give the plastic property to your tape. Okay. So what is the process of making ceramic slurry? So here I have given. So for the first step is de-airing of the slurry. You do not want. So first you ball mill your slurry, and then you take the slurry out, and that slurry may have some entrapped air, right? So you do not want that entrapped air to be present when you pour the slurry inside the tape caster. So you have to de-air the slurry, and this is the experimental setup to de-air the slurry. What you do is you take a vacuum chamber desiccator, and you put your slurry in a glass beaker, and you mix the magnetically stir the this slurry, and after stirring, you increase the vacuum, so you will see that the air will come out from this slurry out of it. So you have to do this for maybe 1 to 2 hours to take out all the air which is present inside the slurry through this vacuum process. Then you have to basically control the thickness of the tape by adjusting these screw gauges. Sorry. By adjusting these screw gauges, which will control the thickness of which will control the gap between the doctor blade and the mylar which is present. Okay, so these are the 2 screw gauges which are there. Okay, so I have just put the this doctor plate on top of the substrate, right? This is the mylar, and this is your mylar, right? This is your mylar. And basically you pour your fluid here, you pour your fluid here, and this gap that you see is will control the thickness of the tape that you will get. Okay, so you after the de-airing of the slurry, you pour the slurry in this space, and because of the movement of the mylar, you will get a green ceramic tape coming out after you pour all the ceramic slurry in that particular space present in the doctor blade. Okay, this mylar continue to move it at slow speed, and finally you will get a green ceramic tape. You can get tapes of 20,000 micron, okay, which are basically thick, right? And these are not thin film; these are thick tape. Now, once you get the tape, as I said, that these tape can be standalone, or you have to basically they can also act as a coating, right? So for the coating purpose, you have to laminate these tape together, right? So there is a process called lamination, where you laminate these different type of tapes together, and you get a multi-layer structure. Okay. So I am now going to talk about 3 type of case study that I will be talking about, right? Which will be using, which will be showing you the process of coating and membranes, right? So I will talk about first is solid oxide fuel cells, which is a solid state electrochemical device that converts chemical energy of the fuel to electrical energy. So you can see that this is the microstructure of a solid oxide fuel cell, and you can see that it's a multi-layered structure made of different materials. This is your cathode, this is your cathode, this is your anode, right? And of course this is your electrolyte, right? This is your electrolyte, and one can see that the anode and cathode are porous in nature, while electrolyte is dense in nature, right? It is dense. So it's a multi-layer structure with the combination of various material having different functionalities and structural features, right? And the important thing is that this is all solid form. There is no liquid involved, right? So this is the schematic of SOFC. So what basically happened is that air flow along the cathode sides, and the fuel flow on the anode side, right? So oxygen, when it comes in contact with the interface of electrolyte and cathode, then this reaction will occur. Now, if this cathode does not have any porosity present, then the oxygen may not go at the interface region, right? So that is the reason we require a pores present inside the cathode. And this is the same reason why anode also have some pores present inside this layer, right? So that the fuel can come in contact with the electrolyte and anode interface. Important thing is that you have observed that in the macrostructure, the anode have large pores while cathode has small pores. The reason for that is that the anode is forming water molecules, right, which also have to take out. So that's the reason that anode normally have large pores present, while cathode has a small porosity present. However, electrolyte do not have any porosity. It should be highly dense, because if it is not, then hydrogen and oxygen will directly combine together to form a chemical reaction. But we do not want that. We want that this reaction happen electrochemically, and so the oxygen ion flow from cathode to the anode side where the reaction occur, and this is dictated by this Nernst equation, right? And you will get a potential from this. So this is the working of it, and you can see that the electrons are formed, and that electron can go to the external circuit to provide some useful power, and then finally it will go back, and then it combines with oxygen molecules again to form oxygen. Okay, so this will complete the whole circuit.
Dr. Romer, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, if you can conclude in a few slides, and we may have to have about at least 10 to 15 minutes of interaction.
Sure. So I will just talk about a little bit. Just give me 5 minutes, okay? So this is the button cell that we have fabricated, and you can see this is the anode, which is a tape, and which is tape casted, and then the coating of this electrolyte is done through spray coating. Okay, that is a slurry is there, and then you spray the electrolyte over it, and then you sinter that. And you can see that the white color now changes to completely green, right? And the reason is that this is around 15 micron thick film. And once you have 15 micron film, it becomes more transparent in nature once it gets sintered. Okay, that's why it transforms to green. And then you apply the cathode by a brush coating. Okay, so this is basically the microstructure that you will get. You see, you have a dense layer of electrolyte and a porous cathode anode. And if you make a large scale cell, then you have to basically laminate, use a lamination process where you laminate the tapes together, right? And so this is basically the lamination process where you are laminating different tapes together, thick film and thin film. And also sometimes you also have to put some infiltrate some precursor solution in the cathode and anode in order to enhance the catalytic activity of the electrochemical reaction occurring at the electrodes. So this is what it is done, and then you followed it by the blade coating of the cathode on the electrolyte surface. So I will not talk about the batteries because of the time constraint, but this is very important. So I'm just going to present you the case study of the TBC, which is very important. And TBCs are used to insulate the superalloys, which cannot withstand such a high temperature of the fuel. And as I said, that the fuel will operate at high temperature, and if you increase the fuel temperature, then the efficiency also increases of the device. So we have to protect these superalloys, and we do that by coating with the bond coat as well as some type of oxides. Right, bond coat is used is basically of 100 micron, and it is used as a it contains chromium, aluminum, yttrium, right? As it's an alloy, and it is oxidation resistant, while zirconia provide the thermal barrier. You can say the maximum thermal barrier that you can get is from the top coat of zirconia, and and zirconia we use it because it has low thermal conductivity, right? Low thermal conductivity, and it has a very close thermal expansion coefficient as in super alloys. So that will not spoil the top coat from this TBC when the temperature changes. So these are few requirements of a thermal barrier coating, and you can see it's a low thermal conductivity, high melting point, no phase transition should occur, chemical inertness should be there, thermal expansion mismatch should be negligible, it should adhere very well to the substrate, and the low sintering rate for obtaining porous structure. So I basically, to summarize, I mean, this is the last slide. So, so here I have shown you the microstructure of two top coat that are prepared from air plasma spraying technique and from electron beam plasma vapor deposition technique. And you can see in this microstructure that is prepared from air plasma technique that the splat that is formed, they have cracks or porosity along the interface of bond coat and this top coat, right? However, in the microstructure that you will obtain from EBPVD, these are columnar in nature. Right? So these are two important features which you will observe in the microstructure. Now, what happened is that when the spread boundaries and cracks are parallel to ceramic metal interface, they will try to reduce the thermal conductivity, and that is very good. Right? And that will protect your the component material. However, they do not have a very long thermal cycle life, because what happens is that there is a surface of the this bond coat is not uniform, and that will create a lot of out of plane stresses. Okay, so it has a very short thermal cycle life if the splats are parallel to this interface of the metal and ceramic. On the other hand, you have a columnar grain, right? You have a columnar grains which are present, and inside this columnar grains you have a porosity present. And of course, these columnar grain will also have some porosity in between that will basically absorb all the stresses which are present because of this undulating nature of this ceramic metal interface. Okay, of course, the thermal conductivity will be lower in this EBPVD microstructure compared to APS, because there will not be any interface that will stop the thermal conduction. Okay, all the layers are not at 90 degree. They are out of plane compared to what you will have with the APS microstructure. Okay, but EBPVD TBC are more expensive but can withstand more cycle than APS TBCs. Okay, so this is about the coating and memories. So I think I am way ahead of time. So, so you may ask me any questions right now if you have.
Thank you, Dr. Shobhit Omar, for such a wonderful presentation on coatings and membranes. You took through us about the various methods and techniques, and also talked about what the work going on in IIT Kanpur, and we really acknowledge your, for having spared your time and effort and share your knowledge. If this Atal program has done one thing, it has taken this sharing of knowledge into a different level. I mean, in a regular offline, we wouldn't have been able to have such, such participation and such speakers. So, I mean, just imagining the amount of sharing that is going on, if it reaches all corners of the country, this will really revolutionize the coming years as such. I'm sure on that. So thank you. And I will now, sir, if you can open your chat box, if you have access to your chat box, there could be some questions on the chat box. You can start with that. After you have, maybe a couple of questions are there. If you can't read it, I can read it for you. And also it will be open for other participants to orally ask you questions, as one or two have already done. So are you able to check the chat box?
Yeah, I can check. So Amitesh Kumar have asked, what is the cooling rate of splat quenching? So
Then
I do
after
not
that,
have.
you have to, yeah, after that, you have to go back because there's still questions before that.
No, I
That's the
think
last, that's the last one.
that is the last one, but there are no other questions.
If you scroll back, you will get it. It is also possible that since you re-entered, maybe you are not able to see everything. I will read out the questions for you, sir. You
Okay.
can answer this for the time being.
So what is the cooling rate of splat quenching? I think you are talking about the thermal spraying, right? So in that particular case, you rapidly cool the your splat on the substrate, and I do not have what is basically the magnitude of this cooling rate, but normally you quench it. That is will decide the microstructure that you will get from the this thermal spraying technique.
Dr. Omar, there is a question from Ziauddin Sheikh. Is it possible to use waste materials powder such as rice husk ash or fly ash, etc., as coating materials over aluminum-based alloys or composites?
Okay. But for what type of application that you are trying to use? If it is an electronic one, so I won't say yes, because for that purpose you require a highly pure coating, and you should not have any type of contamination. Of course, low contamination is preferred. So what type of coating, if you, for what application that you are preferred to do? That depends upon that.
Ziauddin Sheikh, can you come online? There's another question of yours. You can ask it yourself. Mr. Ziauddin Sheikh, are you there? Can you hear us? Can you come online, please? No, there was a question by one Mr. Ziauddin Sheikh on the chat box. Maybe he is not able to hear us. There is one more question from the same person. Is it possible to use any coating over any aluminum-based alloy or composite for property enhancement? So, aluminum-based alloys or composites, in order to enhance the properties, what type of coating would you use?
What type of coating? I am not sure. Like if you are preferring a polymer, then you have to use the liquid-based coating that I have talked about. And if you are using, of course, ceramic, or thin film or thick film, then you have to choose the vapor deposition techniques.
On the chat box, we have another question now, Dr. Omar.
Okay. What type of coating best suited for powdered nanoparticles on bioimplant? Electrochemical. I think electrochemical deposition is going to be suitable for that purpose.
Yeah. Any other person wants to come online and speak to to Dr. Omar?
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
This is regarding a question regarding fuel cell.
Yeah.
You are talking about the button cell.
Yeah.
How this cathode, gadolinium oxide based cathode, how it is deposited?
You can deposit. What we do is a blade coating.
Spin coating.
Blade coating that I've talked about.
Spray coating.
Blade. You can use blade coating for that purpose.
Okay, I'm not able to.
Blade coating that you. Okay, I will just share the screen again.
Okay.
Just wait.
Blade coating. Okay. I got it. Blade coating. Okay.
So you see this one, right?
Okay.
You can see this. You can see this, right? So
Okay.
blade coating is done to apply the cathoding.
Okay.
For large size cell, you normally use this type of technique. But it also depends upon what type of material that you are trying to do.
Okay.
These are anode supported cells. So we are coating the cathode over the electrolyte because the cathode can sinter at lower temperature, but you require a higher temperature for your nickel anode to sinter.
Okay.
So it also depends upon what type of combination of cathode and electrolyte and anode that you are using.
What about nanoparticles? dispersing nanoparticles.
Yeah, so you use infiltration techniques. Okay, so what you do is you have a prefabricated porous structure, and then you, so here in this case, you see that precursor solution, this structure is immersed inside the precursor solution, right?
Okay, okay.
So one way is this, the other way is you can take a dropper and you pour the precursor solution.
Okay,
Okay, and that solution is basically based on salt. Like
Okay.
here in this particular case, gadolinium nitrate and cerium nitrate. Okay, and that solution is poured over it, and then you dry this whole sample in vacuum, so
Okay.
that this whole solution get covered over the this your scaffold that you have formed. Okay, and in that way you get a small nano-sized particle on basically your structure. Of course, you have to calcine it, otherwise it will remain like gadolinium oxide or cerium oxide. You have to calcine it for the reaction to occur from gadolinium to cerium, to form gadolinium dope cerium.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
You
Yeah.
have some more questions in the chat box also.
Is audible? Is audible, sir?
Okay, so what type of coating best suited? This is fine. Which material are suited for increasing the porosity in case of supercapacitor application? So normally, what I mean, I'm not aware of supercapacitor, but for batteries, if we want to increase the porosity, or in fuel cell, we normally use some type of this polymer, PMMA, right? Which can be used to make porous electrode structure. And you can make electrode porous in 3-dimensional electrode architecture using PMMA. That is what we use. You can also use starch as a pore former. Okay, so this type of material you can also use. What you normally do is you make a slurry out of it, of the electrode, that will contain your active material as well as the other type of additives, as well as your this pore former, right? And then you make a uniform homogeneous slurry, and then you coat it on the substrate, and then you sinter it in air. If you don't do it in air, then this pore former, that is starch or PMMA, will not go out. So you have to do it in air, and once you do that, whatever is left is basically the pores inside the electrode structure. So you can do such type of processing. Is it possible to disperse nanoparticles by ultrasonic streaming? Yes. I do not know what do you mean by streaming, but you can of course disperse the nanoparticles by ultrasonic.
Dr. Romer, there would be 1 or 2 questions on the oral, from the oral route as well. Dhananjaya, yeah?
Yes, yes. Is audible, sir?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. When you're discussing about coating and thin film or you can say membrane, I am asking the question related to application. When you try to coating something for one reason, will it not affect for other effect? Will it not affect to other positive reason? Mistake example, you give the example about the glass. You want to make an anti-reflective glass. So when you find the coating for anti-reflective glasses, will that coating will not affect for other reason?
Will that coating what? Will that coating?
Will that coating will not affect for some other effective?
So you mean to say that when you coat when you have a coating of anti-reflective glass,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Anti-reflective coating on the glass, then it may also have some side effect. Right?
Yeah,
that is what.
Yeah.
That will have. You have to have some trade-off. How much amount of positive thing it will giving. You have to weigh this up, right? What are the pros and what is the cons from using a protective coating? Similar is the case in the TBCs, right? If you coat the superalloy with this insulating top coat, but that is giving you higher energy efficiency from the whole component, from gas turbine. but you also have to waste so much energy as well as the cost to make the top coating of the component, right? So you have to weigh what is the what are the pros and what are the cons while using such type of coating, and while choosing a such type of technique, processing technique to coat the samples.
Yes, thank you. Next is when you discuss about thin film on thick film, we're just making a 2D layer. My question is that if you make a film of rod or film of any nanoparticles, particle is okay, you can make it. But any shape, if you want to make a thin film on the substrate, is it possible by the technique which is available till now?
I again am not getting your question. What is your question?
Actually, when you're making the thin film, that is only
Yeah.
2D. But my question is that if I want to make a film of nanorod or any nanoflower or any shape of thin film, is it possible by this type of technique?
Thin film of nanorods.
Yeah.
Well, you can use this spin coating for that. Spin coating for that. And it depends upon what type of material it is again there, right? So if it is a polymeric material, then you can of course use it, the spin coating and all. Sometimes people also use ceramic material like ceramic slurry to make making a thin film on the substrate by spin coating. But then you have to go to high temperature, and that high temperature disturb everything. Okay, you can use the CVD technique. CVD technique to get the microstructure out, whatever you are trying to say. So that can be one of the possibility. But again, in CVD process, you have to go to high temperature for this reaction to occur. But then there is a plasma enhanced CVD which work at 250 to 300 degrees centigrade. That can, I guess, can give you that can retain this structure that you are talking about.
Yes, I got it. The next is when you discuss about magnetron sputtering, you are giving the substrate which is anode is positive and argon also positive. So is it that substrate anode positive is greater than argon positive? Then only the particle will be go to and deposit in the substrate.
See, anode is positive because and the cathode is negative, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what you do is you create the plasma inside. Magnetron is basically enhancing the formation of the this plasma, because what happens is that electrons which is present in the sputtering gas, it will try, this magnetron will try to give a cylindrical path. Okay, so these electrons, once they get a cylindrical path, they will collide more with these argon atoms, and they will lead to ionization of the argon atom. Now these argon ion, these are positively charged, they will accelerate it towards the target cathodic material. Okay, target is negative, right? So they will sputter the surface of the target, and that will lead to ejection of atoms in the vapor form from the target material. Okay, so that's the reason that these atoms will then again basically get deposited on the anode side, which is your substrate.
Okay. This is the last question. It may not be a question. So when you make a patent toward this a new coating type, so what to do, sir?
Can you repeat one more time?
When you're going to make a patent to form a new coating techniques, so what the process and the steps?
I do not know what is the process of making patent. Of course, you have to contact some patent company for that. I do not know about it. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of this lecture from Dr. Shobhit Omar. Sir, Dr. Omar, on behalf of AICTE Atal Initiative, and also on behalf of MS Raman Institute of Technology, Department of Mechanical Engineering, coordinators, and all the participants, we extend a heartfelt thanks to you for taking time off and sharing your knowledge and all the work that you have been doing. I'm sure the participants will take away a lot of thoughts from your side. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar,
Yes,
for
sir.
this, for inviting me, and it was really a privilege to be here and presenting my work. Although I was not able to finish everything, and it would have been nice to maybe show more of a case study. And I felt like maybe I have spent a lot of time in describing the deposition technique, but those are also very important. Maybe next time I will try to improve more over the teaching part of the case study that will make participant more exciting towards these technologies.
Yes, that's the most important thing, isn't it? It should be it should carry inspiration and influence people to take up more and more work in this area.
Yes.
That's the one of the important objectives of all this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.